Misha here, and I told you I'd be back, and I'll be even in front of the camera for this video. You know, last time I looked at a lot of the Chinese space stuff because I found some, well, diecast and other scale models of the Chinese space program, and they are making leaps and bounds. I'm not going to say they have surpassed the US and Russia yet. They're getting close. They're definitely catching up. I wanted to do a US version, but what's the US really been up to lately? When you start thinking about the US space program, obviously the shuttle was retired in 2011. We've had various, cargo launch things and whatnot. But when you get there, it's all dominated by SpaceX. And you really cannot talk about SpaceX without talking about its founder, creator, and I will say visionary, Elon Musk. Yeah, today, politically, it can kind of be a thing with him, but keep in mind, he was kind of the darling of the other side at one time, including President Obama. And I think that's because, kind of like Werner von Braun, he is not all that political. He's goal-oriented. And then there's a ton of pro-Musk people online, always has been, so I'm not going to do that as much as I can. I'm going to talk about SpaceX, because I found some various models on Amazon. Here are two that are kind of relevant to this video. They are actual metal, and about 1/200, some say 1/230 scale. It's a little, again, Chinese production, what do you do? On the right, we have the Falcon 9 Block 5. On the left, we have its literal big brother, the Falcon Heavy, which is, basically Falcon 9 strapped together 3 times. That's the heavy lift that they have. So that's what we're going to talk about today, as well as, what makes it innovative. Here's one more little model. This is the landed version because it's reusable. We've had reusable rockets before. The space shuttle boosters were recoverable, but those just splashed down. This is actually a propulsive vertical landing. It's pretty cool. The company history is interesting too, and I'm going to try to share little stories. But first, look, this video was literally months in the making. I've been on it all year, finding models, doing things, researching when I have time. Guys, I can't do this if I just get 100 views. Now, I'm not blaming you, but what I'm saying is I can't do social media. Please share this on any website, Facebook, Instagram. You might think it's valid to try to at least, I don't need, this is a personal channel, I do it for fun, but I'm taking time out of my, work to do this for what it's worth. So if it's worth it, let's see if we can get that bumped up. I kind of made the same call on the Mishaco channel because the algorithm is changing and it's getting hard. But with that, let's just dive in. And unfortunately, while these are the current Falcon 9s, I couldn't find a diecast model of the original Falcon 1 where it all began. So you're just going to have me as a talking head for a minute. When I said these are diecast, I'm not lying. This thing is heavy. The outside detail, the engines, they are polymer, but yeah, it's heavy. It does come with its Stromback erector, which is articulated. Now this one is polymer, this is plastic, but it only adds, if you want to get it as a set, like $5–10 to add it on, so that's why I did it. But we're a long ways off. The Falcon 9 doesn't really appear until about 2010. And SpaceX goes all the way back to 2000. Well, sort of. Elon Musk love him or hate him, frankly, I like his goals. If you know me at all, space travel has been a lifelong interest. And also, looking at the story with him, he is absolutely on the spectrum, if not outright autistic. That's not a jab against him. Anyone who's watched my videos probably notices a thing or two as well. This is definitely one of his special interests. So it goes back, he's in college. Yes, we all know he's from South Africa. Yes, he did come from money. But he made money on money. But he didn't do it by playing safe. What I really do like about it, a lot of people today will buy existing companies, break them apart, or, trade them off, switch around being CEOs every 6 months. No. This whole thing is a very traditional story. He did go to university. He did get an undergrad degree in physics and a degree in business. Started to go to be a PhD, but never went anywhere. Got into business and had some early ventures, including PayPal. That's relevant to the SpaceX story because it's kind of where the money comes from. He's kind of run out of town in 2000, but of course he still has shares in the company. When I say run out of town, he was CEO. He's kind of out. He still has his shares. And so he's bored. He has some money, but he's not anything like a billionaire yet. So he's literally kind of doom scrolling, early days of the internet, and he's wondering, what NASA's up to, like me. This is 2000, 2001 time period, and he's all about Mars. He's just we went to the moon when he was a kid. Well, actually, right before he was born, I think. Yeah, right before he was born, and he's surprised that they're not going to. So he kind of gets involved, starts going to meetings, various things like the Mars Society, other clubs. There are various little meetings around as, the future of space exploration, because the shuttle is 20 years old at this point, and everyone knows it can't last forever. This is pre-Columbia disaster, by the way. And he reads up. This is where I definitely see him on the spectrum. He reads everything he can, has a little bit of that background because of his degree, but just voraciously consumes technology. And along with kind of meeting other people, including a gentleman named Jim Cantrell, they kind of work on this idea called Mars Oasis, which, yes, there's a Wonderwall joke in there somewhere. But it's to basically launch a small habitat, like a little greenhouse, to Mars. I believe early on they even thought about like mice, but, let's send in some plants, land it on Mars. Keep in mind this was right after some very successful rover missions in 97 to Mars, so, okay. What to do? You need to launch. Well, obviously at the time, go to Russia. I can identify with that. This is about the time I first went to Russia, too. Because while they're not in the depths of their economic depression that they had been in 98, 99, 2001, 2002, it's still not great times. And they've got converted R-36 ICBMs that are basically good orbital launch vehicles. These strong back types were not developed by SpaceX. Various launch companies have used versions of these for a long time. They basically can transport horizontally, then erect. Pretty cool. So, in October of 2001, he goes to Russia. Wants to buy, this is where it gets a little unclear. Some sources say he wanted to buy some converted ICBMs. Some say he wanted to buy space on them. That's probably more likely. What they all agree on, he was pretty much mocked. There's all kinds of stories about him being spat on. I don't know, but I can definitely see Russians drinking, and there's definitely stories. I believe that completely because that's Russia and the culture, and I can definitely see them razzing him and drinking and all that, but it's not a great reception. It really isn't. And then it gets to cost, and the numbers get a little vague, but they obviously wanted a considerable amount of money for launches or to purchase rockets. The script doesn't go anywhere. Pretty discouraged. He leaves Moscow. Now, a little bit later, Russians come to America to meet him ostensibly. What they really did is they came to party in California and Las Vegas. Nothing really goes anywhere. Again, details are a little froggy, but I completely believe this knowing Russians. Okay, February 2002, one more effort. Yeah, Jim Cantrell, by the way, went with him to Russia the first time. Just kind of a buddy that's similar minded. They do one more meeting, and basically, here's a sticking point. Elon has decided he will pay up to $8 million for one missile launch. And the Russians are kind of at 18 million. Now he tries to negotiate, what if I buy 3? This is pretty famous, whatever. Yeah, then they just jack up the price more to 21 million. They're playing with him. It's kind of funny because you think they need money. They have all these missiles, but they're not business people, especially at this time. 2002, Putin's just coming in. Capital. It's a time. I was there a little bit after that, a year or two later, and the way Russian business was conducted was counterintuitive. That's for sure. This shuts the door on the whole Russian connection, and really gets Musk thinking, why am I even buying someone else's rockets? It also kills the Mars Oasis idea. This booster model is pretty cool. It's meant to simulate it in its landed position. Eventually we'll get there. So what he does, late that winter 2002, he has a meeting. He invites several engineers, including Cantrell. He wants to form a new company. He will actually incorporate it March 14, 2002 as Space Exploration Technologies Incorporated, acronym SET or SET. But yeah, he invites these engineers. He gets a little bit better reception. Some still think he's a nutter. Keep in mind, he has no background in aerospace. He's not a well-known person at this time. He's just one of the tech bubble billionaires, far from being anything. I should even say millionaires if I didn't say billionaires. He's not a billionaire yet. And his money's pretty limited. He used his money from PayPal. eBay was going to be buying him out this year, so his stocks are going up. He basically ends up dumping about $90 million. Originally, he had about $30 million to play with. He would have eventually put that more into the company. It's self-funded. This is not what's happening. And he doesn't really have much. But at that meeting, there was 5 or 6 engineers there. A couple were interested. He, in fact, gave them all job offers, job titles. 3, including Cantrell, did not accept, but 2 did. Chris Thompson was hired on to basically design the rocket body, the couplings, things like that. Tom Mueller was hired on as the engine man. He would make the Merlin and Kestrel engines. Very important there. They would hire Tim Buzza to do basically flight director, launch coordination, that kind of thing, because we're going to be launching rockets. And most importantly, in this sense, because these are a bunch of nerds, anyone who's ever heard Elon Musk talk, yeah, public speaking is not his thing. So, in August of 2002, Musk would hire Gwen Shotlow. She would be PR. They needed this. They needed a alternative thing. These guys, these are nerds. These are engineers. They hire others. Musk is very hands-on. This is his company, his dream. He has been public since 2001 about wanting to be an interplanetary species, colonize Mars, whatever. Mars is just kind of the nearest one that might work. It grows. They get a place going on, and originally they go immediately to work on their first rocket, which, yes, he names Falcon 1. Yes, that's after the Millennium Falcon. Let's move on. He wants the first test launch by the end of 2003. That ain't happening, but they still make remarkable progress, and part of it is the vertical integration that he wants. This does save time and money because he wants a low-cost launch. Ultimately, he's still wanting to go to Mars. That's his deal, colonize Mars. But finally, he's getting at least a little more reasonable of, okay, maybe we should at least get to orbit first and, develop everything. Mueller's got the Merlin and the Kestrel engines. and they don't have a place to test them, so they buy a defunct test ground. It was an old aerospace company's facility in McGregor, Texas, and they're already testing engines there by March, April 2003. They're making the things, and the whole idea of this vertical integration, they're going to design and manufacture most everything in-house. And since they're in the aerospace industry, government contracts and all that, even the private, they're going to be hiring domestically, mostly U.S. citizens or at least U.S. green card holders. Yes, Musk was originally not a U.S. citizen. He has been for some time now. It's a country of immigrants, so that doesn't bother me one bit. And again, it's a lot of his own money, and he owns a majority of the company, especially at this point. And they start off very small. They're going from there. They are able to unveil a mock-up of the Falcon 1 in late 2003, December 18, I believe, over in Washington, D.C. So they at least kind of have an idea of what they're going to do. And even before the first launch, 2004, Musk says he's going to do a heavy lift, maybe even a super heavy if there's a market. He's looking at government contracts. He's looking at private. He basically wants to decrease the cost of getting to space. He thinks it can be done for $500 a pound. That's ridiculously low, even by today's standards. By 2004 standards, it's unthinkable, frankly. Yeah, but it's all on paper. We have a mock-up. We have some engines. What are we going to do? It's still a long time coming, and that pace, well, there's pros and cons to this vertical integration. You know, he did a cost analysis of the cost of rockets, and he's right that the components to build them aren't really the big expenditure. It's the engineering, the R&D, the experience, the know-how, but it's also government bloat. And this is going to both help and hurt him, as we'll see with the first 3 test launches of Falcon 1. But where to launch them from? California, that's not going to work. Texas really isn't ideal either. We need some places close to the equator as we can get, but also something kind of pre-established. The answer, Omelek Island in the Martian Islands, near the equator. The U.S. government had used it as a missile testing facility back in the 80s. So there's some structures there, even though it's very remote. But they lease a thing there, and work's underway by June 2005, building new facilities where needed, refurbishing existing facilities where possible, and pretty much this work gets done by September, October of that year. One of the stories that's out there, and I enjoy it, so I'm telling it, is that there was a worker strike. I don't blame them. Musk was a driver, 24/7. He was fast to do things, fast to learn, fast to fix, fast to go again. That was part of his strategy to save money. He wanted to make Falcon 1 a $6 million per launch vehicle. He even thought about making it reusable, at least the first stage, although they never would get there for reasons. Yeah, and I think that's just his personality too. He's just a do it. That impatience, that drive is part of a certain type of personality that I do understand very well. I understand when people went on strike too. I mean, he's working him hard. He didn't want people with families back in the company was hiring him. He wanted them dedicated heart and soul to SpaceX because he was. By the way, the name SpaceX, as I said earlier, it was space, blah, 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 technologies. That soon got shortened to SpaceX because it's much easier to say, and there we go. So how did he fix the strike? He took a page from the Berlin airlift and airdropped in fried chicken wings and cigarettes. And it worked. Work was finished, and by November of 2005, they were ready to begin testing. But the first couple of launch attempts were not successful through that December. In fact, the first stage was ruined. They had to send a new one over, and they had to, send it over by a boat from California, erect it there. It was a cumbersome process. But finally, in 2006, they have a new first stage. They have a second stage. In March, they're set up and ready to go. The original F1 was both ambitious and modest. I mean, it was ambitious because it was, coming out of nothing. And private companies had not really done this before anyway, not to mention startups like SpaceX. But it was small. It was under 69 feet tall, about 21 meters. It was just about 5.5 feet wide, like 1.7, 1.8 meters wide. It was 2 stages, but there was only one engine. There was a Merlin on the first stage and a Kestrel meant for vacuum on the second stage. And it was really only meant to lift. Originally, they were hoping 1,000 pounds or so. Then they knocked that down to theoretically 900. In reality, they really only ever attempted, about a 600 pound payload. I think the maximum payload was like 670 pounds. Enough for a satellite, but gives you an idea of what it was. And again, they thought about making reusability, but they never would get there. But it was liquid fueled, and that was important too for private organizations. And while it was meant to be private, the first 2 flights, SpaceX had announced the previous year that they were going to have a half dozen flights. Again, at $6 million each. Reality would end up being more like $7 million, still cheaper than what Russia had quoted them years earlier. And again, they're making all this in-house. Elon made some good decisions and some different ones we'll get to. But the U.S. government would purchase the first couple of flights to kind of invest in the technology. So finally, the first flight, I hesitate to call it a test flight because Musk actually put one of the U.S. government, I think it was an Air Force satellite, as the payload. So he was pretty confident. Anyway, it was set up and they pushed the button, metaphorically speaking, on March 24, 2006. And it did launch. And it did fly for just over 30 seconds, half a minute. Then it exploded. Why? Well, those cost-cutting measures. There was a valve. It was an alloy valve. It had been messed with. Elon, instead of using aerospace-grade stuff, just kind of used standard. It got corroded. It wasn't in there right. It led to a fuel leak, a whole thing. I'm not a rocket engineer, sorry. But the point is the cost-cutting. This sometimes worked for Elon. It really did. Sometimes it didn't. And with Flight 1, it absolutely didn't. But it was a learning experience, and I will give him credit and the team, which is still relatively small. This is still a small company, credit. While I'm sure it was disheartening, I'm sure there were shots taken, drink shots, not the other kind. They used it as what they should, a learning experience. They didn't get down, because they did successfully launch. I mean, that is something. Not bad, really. I mean, look how many of the Russian and American rockets exploded in the 50s and 60s. So, no shade there. Let's try it again. So they work hard, and 2007, March 21, they're ready to go again. And again, they put a real payload on the second flight. This is a NASA DARPA satellite. Again, they purchased the first couple of flights anyway. And this time, it did launch and did successfully separate stage 1 from 2. And stage 2, the Kestrel engine would ignite, but then it would lose control, suffer an imbalance, spin wildly, and be destroyed. That's because of fuel. That fuel imbalance is a major thing, and this is again where Elon did a cost-cutting thing. In the fuel tanks, he did not put slosh baffles in, which kept the fuel, they cost money, expense, and because of that, it was lost, along with the DARPA NASA satellite. So they did get closer this time, but still no dice. And now money by 2008 is running out. Musk puts in more of his millions, and he actually turns to Peter Thiel, who was with him at PayPal, and who was one of the people that actually kind of ousted him from his leadership position, but apparently that was business. They remained on cordial terms. Thiel donated, well, I shouldn't say that. He invested a few million, I think around 20 million into SpaceX too. That helped. They're ready to have a third attempt on August 2nd of 2008. And it again fails. They do separate. And this time, it's not directly a Musk's decision. Basically, the first stage, instead of tipping over and going down, still continues up and impacts the second stage, knocking them both haywire, and the mission's again launched. This is a pretty low point because they're pretty well out of money. Again, thanks to some late capital influx, they were able barely to scrape together one final test flight. And what they would do was use mostly existing parts that were around. Now, every time they flew, they would iterate and change. So the Falcon 1, for example, the Merlin engine was originally the 1A, and on the third flight, it was the 1C, so there's an updated engine there. So they would keep changing and, adding things like the fuel baffles and correcting little things. But nevertheless, they kind of scraped together what they could, and they, again, did the 24/7 work thing and had a new rocket ready to go and over in the Marshall Islands by the end of September, in under 8 weeks from, when the last failure. So, September 28, 2008, fourth flight of Falcon 1. This really is. I don't think it's hyperbole to say this is everything on the line. This is the last money they have, the last parts they have. You can only have so many failures in a row. So if this doesn't work, it's probably the end to this ridiculous company, which, by the way, has already done more than most thought they ever would, especially those Russians who laughed at him, those engineers who didn't believe in SpaceX back in early 2002, what have you. And as is famously known, flight number 4, which had a simulated payload, I think that was the key all along, kind of half joking about that, made it. It successfully separated, flew for 2.5 minutes. The upper stage went into orbit, did its thing. Of course, this wasn't recoverable at the time, so, burn up and re-entry, but there you go. Finally, SpaceX has a test win. And that was good, because they had people interested in them. They had already had a contract to deliver the RatSat into orbit for Malaysia. That's actually the payload simulator they used. And NASA was looking at them. They'd already injected some money into the company to kind of evolve the technology, see what's going on. And they were watching closely these test flights because, again, they know the shuttle is ending. They were originally kind of planning around 2010. It gets extended to 2011 to finish the space station. But we've got this new station that's just now getting finished in orbit. We're going to need to maintain it. We're going to need to resupply it. What are we going to do it with? Okay, so first off, we have to mention 2009, July 14, the RatSat from Malaysia was successfully launched on the 5th and, as it would turn out, final Falcon 1 mission. It would successfully put the payload into orbit, stable orbit. The satellite would later fail, but SpaceX had nothing to do with that. They didn't make the satellite. That's not on them. They did their part 100%. That was good. But already before this, going back to right before Christmas, December 23, 2008, NASA awarded SpaceX a commercial resupply contract, CRS, to the ISS. Of course, that meant they were going to have to develop vehicles, something to do. They're going to need a cargo capsule. They're going to need a rocket capable of lifting, more than 600-700 pounds, of course. So Falcon 1 was a proof of concept. There's also what was known as the Falcon 1E, which was the planned replacement. It never made it off the drawing board because they wanted to leap forward after this investment. What NASA did, they awarded the company $1.6 billion to fund 12 cargo resupply flights to the ISS after the shuttle was retired. Now, SpaceX wasn't the only one. Another company, Orbital Sciences, was awarded $1.9 billion. So it sounds like they're getting more. But here's the deal. That was for 8 flights. SpaceX is going to do a dozen flights for less coin than they'll do 8 flights for. That's because Falcon 1 demonstrated it was about a $7 million prospect for Falcon 1. This is already showing that return on investment of vertical integration, and even though they had to learn the hard way, no one lost their lives. In some ways it's just money, as my father would have said. And with this injection of real capital from NASA, they finally turned the corner and finally gotten real respect and recognition. I shouldn't have mentioned that more established aerospace companies and even some in the U.S. government protested these contract awards to both companies. They were examined, reviewed, and allowed to stand. And then the Obama administration would make a very interesting decision in 2009 involving Constellation that we'll talk about in the next video. But let's finally get into Falcon 9 and talk about the various versions and how it became the workhorse of SpaceX today. And SpaceX is pretty much America's launch company. Turned on a little work light. Let me know how it looks to you, which is better. We're almost here. Well, we are here to the Falcon 9 because its first test launch was June 4, 2010. Now, I already mentioned the big phone call at the end of 2008. Going back even a little further to August 2006, NASA awarded a contract, like I said, about $250 million, known as the Commercial Orbital Transport Services contract. This was just to kind of develop things and develop the Falcon 9 here. Now, they had the 1E, which didn't go anywhere. That was going to be a stretched Falcon 1. And they had a Falcon 5, but it was scrapped because what's the point? Go big or go home is starting to be the deal. The Falcon 9 uses 9 Merlin 1C engines on the first stage, and it uses 1 Merlin 1C vacuum rated for the second stage. It's a much taller vehicle. It's about 55 meters, 180 feet tall as a cargo. They went from 1.7 meters to 3.7 meters wide, so about 12 feet, much heavier. They were hoping to do about 24,000 pounds to low Earth orbit, in other words, the ISS, or 10,000 pounds to geostationary orbit. They didn't quite hit it with the original Falcon 1, known as the V1.0. They got to about 20,000 pounds to the ISS and about 7,500 pounds capability to geosat orbit. Still, though, a big improvement over what came before. It came at a cost, literally. Launches would go up to about 50 to 60 million, depending on everything. But again, you're hauling a lot more cargo, and it works out economically. June 4, first test flight. It goes fine. So we have our COTS Demo 1 flight that same year, December 8. It's kind of just a test, and it goes fine. And that leads us to a very monumental step in 2012. We have the Demo 2 flight under COTS, which will dock with the ISS in a cargo vehicle. That would be a major step forward and would open the way to the first, routine, quote-unquote, commercial flight of CRS-1, which was that contract from late 2008. 2013, they would dock to the ISS. It would have a small oopsie. The engine would cut out a little early, but the cargo ship would still make it to the ISS. It's just the secondary cargo attached on the side would be lost. And we would have CRS-2. And from there, March 1st would be the last launch of the Falcon 1.0. They would have a total of 5 launches. the demo flight, the original test flight, the 2 demo flights, and then 2 CRS flights. They would all be successful except for that one little half failure. But they thought they could do better. In 2011, work was underway to replace the original Falcon 9 V 1.0, and then it would have its first test flight September 2013, replacing the 1.0 with the V 1.1, delivering cargo to the ISS in 2014. And it would be very routine. There would be 15 flights of the V 1.1 with 1 failure. And it did cost more, but you got more bang for your buck. Yeah, it cost at least $56 million, over $60 million to launch the V 1.1, but it could lift so much more. It hit that goal. In theory, it could deliver nearly 29,000 pounds to low Earth orbit, but in practical terms, it was 24,000, so they hit that target goal. It could deliver over 10,000 pounds to geostat orbit, although in reality, this probably was never used. It was 60% stronger. It was taller. It over 68 meters, so over 220 feet. It was still the 3.7 meter diameter, 12 feet. Just had more oomph. It was also the very first to experimenting with re-landing. They had a few attempts, none of them 100% successful, but the idea was there. We're still using updated Merlin 1C engines. We've got the 9 arranged here. And the technology is just really pushing forward. It's almost becoming routine with the 1.1. In fact, in September of 2014, SpaceX signs a major contract with NASA to even up the ante more, and the 1.1 was to be the rocket to do it. We'll talk about that in the second video. But June 2015, the CRS-7 flight experiences a launch failure. The cargo vessel is lost. This does lead to suspension of flight for a time as they fix the problems. It's going to happen. That's just rocket technology. And they would resume flying. And the last of this version would fly January 2016. We're finally here. The Falcon 9 V 1.2, or the full thrust. This really began in 2014. I said there was that new contract. The first test flight was December 2015, and it would take over from V 1.1 in 2016. It's a little taller. It's just under 70 meters. Same diameter. Same 9 engines. 2 stages. But it has more thrust, and we'll see subsequent increases. In 2017, we would go from what was known at the time from Block 3 to Block 4, and that would transition over to Block 5, and each time we would get more oomph. And we would make it better, easier for reusability, something that had always kind of been a goal of the program, but until now, they weren't able really to utilize it. It would get to the point where if it was an expendable vehicle, where you just weren't trying to recapture it, you could get 50,000 pounds into low Earth orbit, considering it a heavy lift. If you wanted to reuse it, it's still technically a medium lift, up to 40,000 pounds. If you wanted to go to geostationary, you're still getting a very good return on your investment, 20,000 pounds, give or take. There's even a criteria for what it can get to Mars, which is over 8,000 pounds. Again, just kind of depends on the thing. Now, your launch cost has gone up slightly again into the 60 million range, but again, you're getting a lot more to it. And if you reuse, that drops quickly down to 50 million per launch and should get better. With Block 5, they've improved the reusability, the landing legs, and the refurbishment. Early on, most of the flights were expended, But in more recent years, by 2020, they're reusing the boosters. Now the stage 2 with this is not reusable. That's a minor thing. The stage 1 and the fairing, when you're doing cargo, is reusable. And it's just getting better with time. So basically, we would launch here from the strongback. And then we'd launch from a few different places. Cape Canaveral. And you would obviously have stage separation about 2.5 minutes into flight at about an altitude of 70, 80 km. And then you would insert into orbit. But what's kind of new and different is while the second stage would continue on, now they had experimented with it at earlier versions, but now it's becoming routine. You get the propulsive landing. Now the earliest first boosters to be recovered would just parachute, splash down, very traditional. But that's not good enough for Elon and SpaceX. He's still a very controlling interest. Haven't mentioned him in a while, but he's still here, and his dream of Mars is still very much a thing. But this made it routine. Essentially, you would have these grid fins. They were made of titanium. They would open up once it would flip over and go down, and then you have the landing legs. Essentially, 3 engines would ignite on the way down into orbit to kind of slow the descent, to temper the heat. And of course, it would come in engine first to kind of help be a heat shield. Then it would go in, being guided with these fins by GPS, onboard computer, and of course anything from the ground. And once it got about 1 kilometer from the surface, another engine would ignite. Basically, the 3 would cut off earlier, and then you'd have 1 ignite to kind of slow it down. And the goal was to basically have it touch down at next to no velocity. And not just on the pad it launched from, but also drone ships. They started having automated vessels in the ocean to have these land on. And it's pretty crazy, but it seems successful. This has been the mainstay of not only SpaceX, but America, both commercial, private ventures, satellites, and NASA. Unmanned and manned flights. But that's kind of for video 2. They've had over 520 flights of the Falcon 9, collectively, all the full thrusts from the original V1.2, Block 3, Block 4, now they're up to Block 5, which this represents here. Of those, there's been exactly 1 failure. No loss of life, of course, but yeah, 1 failure out of over 500. They've had over 500 attempts to recover the first stage booster, and nearly 500 were successful. They had maybe 12 failures in total. Still not bad. Again, mostly they're flying refurbished, reused boosters, driving down the cost significantly. We're not quite to that 500 per pound goal that Elon had set, but it's a ton cheaper than Space Shuttle, and still cheaper than Soyuz. Even at $60 million in an expended flight for Falcon 9, Soyuz, at least according to the Russians, is worth at least 80 for a flight. So take that for what you will. Of course, it's old technology, and nothing's really recoverable at that, and it can't lift near the cargo that this can, or people's, we'll see. But way back at the beginning, I said in 2004, they had desire for a heavy lifter. Not this one, but even more. We kind of end with Falcon Heavy. Classed as a super heavy lift. Again, the idea goes all the way back. And it was first revealed to the public in 2011, right as the Falcon 9 was getting underway, because it was to be 3 Falcon 9 boosters, whatever version, with a second stage on top. So it's kind of considered a 2.5 stage, 2.5 stage vehicle because of how it works. And they were hoping to begin test flying these in 2013, but turns out just strapping 3 really powerful boosters together and making them all work right isn't easy. Plus, keep in mind the Falcon 9 is going through all these iterations: 1.0, 1.1, 1.2, full thrust, block 3, 4, 5. There you go. So they admit they have issues. There's kind of a public release in 2017. For once, Elon Musk is not at least publicly optimistic. Nevertheless, the first test flight, February 6, 2018, and that's the one where they send a Tesla not just into space, but a Tesla into like Mars adjacent orbit, or at least, around Mars. It's supposed to take several months to get there, but yeah, because this does have the ability to send payload to Mars, getting close to his dream. Also, fun fact, the dummy inside was named Starman, and yes, David Bowie was playing, and yes, it was Life on Mars, one of my favorite songs. But either way, just the nerdisms on this are so apparent, and being on the spectrum, there's a lot to identify with there. There's also a lot not to, because of the whole, multi-million turning into billionaire. I should also mention that SpaceX, once a company struggling, is doing quite well by this point. It employs thousands of people. This is what propels Musk into the billionaire status. It's highly valued. And Heavy here is just another part of it. Now, it was actually considered to lift people, and theoretically could have. It's just a Falcon 9. Even going to Mars, but they would not use it. Instead, it would be a heavy lift vehicle, and it would begin routine flights in 2019. They would get 5 commercial flights of it, which let SpaceX cover their cost of development, which was a lot more than they expected. And they would even begin flying for the government, not to mention the fancy Space Force. In 2022, they certified Falcon Heavy here. And to date, it's had 11 flights. The most recent one I'm aware of was to Europa, and that was October 2024. So Falcon 9 Block 5 is the main one. You're just going to strap them together like this if you need to get a lot of stuff into space. And of course, it comes at a cost. This model does use the strong back. It's different on the bottom to interface, but it's a little wobbly, so I didn't want to do it here on the table. Kind of neat, though. Basically, with 3 boosters, you can get a big chunk into space. Now, what's happening here is if you're going to expend everything or try to recover and reuse, and there's pros and cons. If you want to just dispose of everything, it's going to be about 150 million per launch, but you're going to be able to launch several pounds into space. You're looking at about that 150,000 pounds into space. If you want to recover part of it, that lowers the cost to about 100 million. But you do lower your cargo a bit. And it just depends if you want to recover all 3 or 2. And of course, to Mars, you're able to get about 8,000 pounds. And there's geostat and everything else. But it does scale pretty reasonably, either each way. Maybe a little bit of economic savings, not to mention just being able to do heavier payloads. The initial test was actually with the Block 3 style. It actually had V1.2 engines, but they were updated to Block 3 standards. But the routine flights that began in 2019 are all Block 5 cores, all 3 of them. Of course, the height is essentially the same. It's just a fraction taller because of the setup, but it's the same for all intents and purposes. And landing's the same. Of course, it's wider at over 12 meters, over 40 feet, but that's just, on that one side. And much heavier. It's a thing. Not unknown, and China has several heavy lift vehicles very similar. Again, it was considered to be man-rated, at least it could be, but it was decided by SpaceX not to do so. Here's a second Falcon Heavy. I kind of accidentally bought this because the Amazon descriptions are not very good. If you can see photos, I'm sure they're helpful. It comes with a base. It's actually permanently attached, which is weird. Usually there's a screw in the bottom, but so I picked up the other one that had the removable stand. But considering how unstable it is because of how heavy the top is, kind of not, unfortunately, that I picked this up. It's okay. I just didn't want one that wasn't removable. They are inexpensive enough. You can do that with these and not worry about it. I think this one was $30 on sale. I think this one with the base was $40. So, what do you do? So it's a limited use vehicle. That's to be understood. But our guy here, the full thrust is in full service and being used today, and seems to be the workhorse of kind of everyone and everything. I mean, an impressive number of launches. That rapid turnaround thing and reuse is really coming true, and that's driving down the cost every day. Even though the early problems were because of cost cutting, as I said, it's a pro and a con. If Musk had stuck to just traditional ways of doing things, we'd be paying traditional prices. And since no lives were lost, it was just capital, even his money mostly, not even investors, it's hard to get upset. You get upset when you stick humans on board. Apollo 1 was upsetting, and you can point to Challenger as well as maybe being... but, yeah. I think it's a really neat story, personally. But what do you think? I have wanted to share this with you for all year, but I wanted to get enough little models to show you. The last couple of ones just came in, like this one here, the landed version. This one is, I'm going to set this down because I have a feeling it's going to wobble. The table's kind of canted. But not being able to read the descriptions, it took me a while. This one has metal in it, but it's lighter, I guess, because it's got more going on. It's not articulated. But it was also $20, so it's fine. Pretty neat, showing the landing characteristics. And again, the heavy would look the same. They don't tend to recover all three cores with these as often, just because of the reduction in cargo ability and the added complication of 3 at once, but they can, and they have. What else can I say? I think we've been here long enough, don't you? Let me know on the light which way you like it. But, I think a lot of the success of the Block 5 and got overshadowed by COVID and other political events, and then, of course, the other more recent political stuff, too. But as I said early on, the Obama administration was a big proponent of SpaceX and kind of doing things this way. And I don't think they were wrong about it. I don't think they were wrong for canceling Constellation, because that led to Dragon and Crew Dragon. And that is what we're going to talk about in part 2. We might even mention Boeing, the CST-100, if you're real good. As I said at the beginning, too, if you can share this on websites, social media that might be interested, that would be great, because I need to get some more views on these videos than what we've been doing. I thought maybe being in front of the camera might help. I don't know. Maybe the opposite. We'll see. Appreciate you tuning in. Please do comment, like, share, subscribe, the usual fun stuff. This is Misha. And I think I'm going to go have some fried chicken wings and cigarettes.